Hi, my name is Kristen Morrison, and I'm a member of the School of Teacher Education and Leadership, and I'm happy to work with the ARO program here at Radford. I want to share with you a little bit about the research that I'm currently working on and how you could assist me in this research. To give you some background, I want to tell you a little bit about my topic and go through a little bit of a presentation here. The topic of my research is regarding open schools. And I've done a whole lot of research about what the heck these things are. So let's kind of go through some PowerPoints on that. So when we think of schools as a physical setting, we often think of it in terms of the egg crate classroom, with the teacher who's in charge, and the teacher is sticking to a standard curriculum and is kind of running the show. And when we say an egg crate classroom, we mean like picture the hallway as the spots between the eggs, and each egg holder is a separate classroom. So each classroom is very much separated from each other, just like eggs are separated in a crate. Well, in the late 1960s or mid-1960s into the mid-1970s, a new philosophy of education started to become popular, and it was called open education. And in open education, they would use a very student-centered pedagogy. And this was very much based on a British model. So if you take a look around this classroom, you don't see kids in separate rows. You don't see kids being lectured to by a teacher. They're very hands-on. The teacher is sort of the guide on the side as opposed to the sage on the stage. And if you look at other pictures, you see that, in some cases, they're no longer the egg crate school where each room is totally separate from another, but maybe they have sliding walls. Or maybe it looks like this, that, it's multiple classrooms in one big open space where there's a lot of group work and a lot of hands-on work going on. Well, so this movement to switching schools to being like this was very popular, as I mentioned, and it really reached an apex of popularity around 1972. So what I've tracked here is I did a whole lot of research, reading in magazines and journals and books, and when I listed over 200 sources that I had referred to, and by their publication date, I saw that, they started to pick up around 1970 and then hit a high point in 1972 and then sort of trickled down. And then by 1986, you didn't see a whole lot in the literature anymore about open schools. Well, right around 1999, it started to pick up again. And so what's going on is schools in other countries besides the United States seem to be reopening this philosophy of education and reopening schools to have spaces, bigger spaces. So what I'm curious about is this time period of why do we see this kind of death right here of open schools, and why is it picking up again afterwards? What happened for a lot of open schools in the United States was in this time period here from like in the late 1970s and into the 80s is that teachers were kind of rejecting the physical environment and changing their pedagogy to go along with it. So what happened was teachers would build their own walls and basically kind of fall back to teacher-centric pedagogy. But again, as I mentioned, in other countries, they're trying to do more of this open space thing. So I'm just kind of wondering, why is it that we sort of are going back and forth between having these student-centered pedagogies to teacher-centered pedagogies to other countries that are embracing the student-centered pedagogies again? So these are pictures, more current pictures of the sort of physical environments that are being created in schools around the world. They're calling them flexible spaces, personalized or project-based learning, but again, very different from the autonomous egg crate model. So I'm really curious, we saw a lot of schools being built in this open model in the United States in the early 1970s, late 1960s. But again, teachers didn't embrace it, and nowadays we don't see a whole lot of schools that are set up like this with the open spaces. So what I'm curious about is what's going on in other countries is very different than from what's going on in the U.S. Is this an indication that the pendulum, the educational philosophy pendulum that swings from very traditional teacher-centered to more progressive student-centered? In the United States, if we look to other countries, that are swinging back to the more open space, are we getting ready to swing back as well? So that's a question that I have. And so I spent some time kind of exploring in the literature, like, why was it that we had swung so far to the teacher or to the student-centered, but then very quickly swung back to the teacher-centered? So I kind of did an autopsy through the literature to kind of try to figure out why was it that we swung so quickly from the early 1970s to the mid 1970s away from the student-centered pedagogy. So I have done sort of a postmortem. So some of the reasons why, even after the buildings were built to accommodate student-centered learning, why did the teachers then put up walls and stop trying these progressive models of education? So the reasons that I've kind of encountered for the death was that, nobody really understood what open schools were supposed to be doing. So there was that definitional ambiguity. So some people would say, oh, when the teachers team together with one another, that's open schools. Or when we just open up the walls, that's open schools. So on one hand, people didn't really have a good firm definition. And so therefore, even though the space was built in a certain way, the teachers could teach kind of however they wanted. And then paradoxically, this ambiguity around the definition was coupled with some people saying, oh, this is the only way to do open schools. And if you're not doing it this way, somehow you're wrong. So that had the effect of confusing people and sort of putting them off, saying, I don't really know quite what this thing is. And when I try, people sort of cast aspersions on me for not doing it right, even though I'm not sure what right is supposed to be. So that's one reason why kind of open schools and student-centered learning sort of went by the wayside. Another reason is that there wasn't a whole lot of research that was done that was really clear on whether or not having these open spaces really did help students' learning or not. The argument was that kids will learn to be more cooperative, kids will become more independent, they'll become more critical thinkers, and lots of studies were done to try to determine that, but because kind of isolating the variables was so difficult, there wasn't like a clear answer as to whether or not open schools were a good thing for learning or not. Another reason for their death in the United States was just insufficient support for model change. In other words, the school board would commission the building of a school to be an open school, but the teachers wouldn't get a whole lot of professional development in how to teach in this new physical environment. And so their tendency was just to kind of revert to their old ways of doing things, putting up bulletin boards and putting up filing cabinets that would block them off from other teachers. So they just kind of reverted to the norm. And a last reason for the possible death of open schools in the United States is that there was just a cultural mismatch. In the United States, we like our numbers. And so, towards the end of the 1980s, we really started focusing in on standardized tests. And that having a standardized test means you have to have a standardized curriculum. And if you have a standardized curriculum, that means that every kid is doing the same thing. In an open school or a student-centered model, kids are supposed to be exploring what they're interested in. Well, that doesn't match with having a standardized curriculum. And it doesn't match with getting good quantifiable information about whether or not kids are learning. So there's a cultural mismatch, perhaps. So I'm kind of curious, is the current open plan, open space schools that we're seeing in other countries going to be like, are they going to die like they did in the United States? Or are they maybe an indicator of a new model that's coming around? But what you would be doing as an ARO student with me in this research is I want to talk a little bit at this point to teachers who have taught in these open space schools. They exist in this community. Sorry, I got to close my Zoom meeting there. So they exist in this community. in Blacksburg, in Pulaski, in Christiansburg, there are these schools that were built in the early 1970s that have no walls between classrooms. How do teachers deal with that situation? What's been easy? What's been hard? So the ARO assistance that I would get for this project, or what you as the student would be doing, is you would be helping me develop questions to ask teachers who teach in these schools, locating teachers who maybe were there right when the school was built and when the model of student-centered model was more popular. And so we would interview or do surveys, we would analyze the data, and we would code the data to basically find, are we seeing themes or something? So I'd love for you to join me if you're interested in this topic, and I look forward to hearing from you. My email is kmorrison12@radford.edu if you're interested. Thanks. Bye.